Well, welcome everyone. I'm Professor Schwagerl, the head of the undergraduate division of the SHAC Institute of Real Estate here at the New York University School of Professional Education. And what I wanted to let you know is that we just have an amazing program today on affordable housing, because we have some spectacular guests to us who have succeeded in spite of the climate that we're in, and in spite of the lack of money that has been afforded to affordable housing. But things may change. There's a sweeping $640 billion 10-year plan proposed by the Biden administration, which we'll get to shortly. But first, why don't I introduce you to our guests? Our first guest is Professor Gerard Delaine. Gerard received his Bachelor of Science in Architecture degree from Florida A&M University in Tallahassee. And he has his Bachelor of Architecture degree. Also, he completed the Master of Science in Real Estate Development program here at NYU at SHAC. Gerard is an adjunct professor at NYU. Many of you might have had him in your graduate or your undergraduate classes. He's taught development process, public-private real estate projects, real estate principles in developing multifamily, and other real estate courses as well. He's currently the Director of Development for Carthage Real Estate Advisors, and Carthage provides and creates real estate and to improve communities and generate needed economic development activity. Joining Professor Delaine today is Isaac Henderson. He's Managing Director of L&M Development Partners. Isaac has 15 years of development experience been involved in the development over 2,000 units of mixed income housing, and has extensive experience working with federal, state, and city affordable housing programs, including low-income and new market tax credits, tax-exempt bonds, and public subsidies. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Currently, Isaac is managing the Essex Crossing project, a 9-site, 2 million square foot development in New York City's Lower East Side that will include over 1,000 units of mixed income housing, retail, office, and community facility space. And I'm proud to say that Isaac has been an amazing partner to SHAC. He has taken several years of my classes through his project, from beginning of development to the construction phase, and all the way through to the opening. And I can't wait to hear more about what's happening with his project. Also joining us today is someone that I'm excited to meet and learn a little bit more about, and that's Thomas Campbell. He's a managing member of Thorobird. They work on the origination, negotiation, and execution of investment management for a number of really interesting projects, which Thomas will tell us about. He's a graduate of Colgate University. He holds both a BA in the Colgate Real Estate Club of New York and an MBA in real estate finance. Let me start first with Professor Delaine. What's interesting, Professor, is that some commentators have called soon-to-be President-elect Biden, a comprehensive plan that he's put forward for housing, while others say, you know, we're just throwing big money at real problems without offering practical solutions. And you could see, even though we had the most people ever turn out for an election, there were pretty split opinions. I don't know that the whole election was decided on the affordable housing issue. I'm sure there were other issues like ethics and drug plans and tax issues that really could have debated this. But you know, we had the largest turnout of African American and people of color in cities that are mostly affected by our housing issues. Tell us a little bit about what those housing issues are. We're acutely aware of them here in New York City, but what does it mean for Americans across the land?
I think for those of us who live in cities, you know, what we saw the day of election and a couple of days afterwards was how important cities were. That, the city and county of Atlanta, Philadelphia and PA, Detroit in the state of Michigan, how important cities are as it relates to the population in states. I think we're growing to appreciate them more now. Right, the state of Georgia now is having a complete, revote on both Senate seats, and in a very, very close, recount of the presidential election. And it's largely looking at the suburban turnout.
Atlanta was a big part of that election.
Exactly. And in particular, the increased voter rolls in the cities, which are mostly diverse. So I think in cities around the country, hopefully there'll be renewed attention to cities. I mean, even in Florida, part of the change in Florida was the changing demographic opinion in South Florida. In West Palm Beach, which we all know about, but Miami-Dade in particular, in that city and its growth, which is not similar to Atlanta, but it's important in the state of Florida, which ultimately decided the direction that state would vote. Well, so I think housing is a critical component of the health of cities.
President-elect Biden expects to expand the housing choice voucher program. Explain to some of our listeners what the housing voucher program is as it currently exists, and why is that essential to affecting affordable housing?
Housing choice vouchers comes down from HUD and provides a subsidy for folks for their rent amount.
Are they known as Section 8? Is that
basically correct?
Yes.
So there's a few different types of vouchers. Project-based vouchers, there's tenant-based vouchers. There's a few different versions, but essentially it assists folks in paying for their housing, so that they don't have to pay more than 30% of their income, or if they go unemployed, that the government will step up and pay a very large percentage of their rent amount.
Right, and under the Trump administration, the HUD secretary cut from that program. So
I just mentioned something else about the housing choice voucher.
Yeah, go for it.
Not widely known. It's also through the home affordability program can be used towards purchases as well. So it can be used towards mortgage, maintenance, and the like. So I think obviously we do a lot of rental housing, new construction as well. But I'm a firm believer that home ownership is part of the key to solving some of the issues in inequity. So
that's a very good point, Thomas. So under the Biden plan, he expects to put $100 billion in what he calls an affordable housing fund. And is that what you're referring to, or what people would be tapping into?
Yeah, I think that the choice vouchers, as opposed to project-based vouchers, the project choice vouchers sit with the individuals. Mm-hmm. And these choice vouchers will give individuals the ability to not only pay rental costs, but also as they search to purchase homes, those vouchers can be used to help them to purchase homes, which I think is transformational for these communities.
I think you are correct, and there was some discussion of that, particularly by Biden during the debates, to explain the differences of how he was going to approach the issue. But do we still then have zoning issues? And I know here in New York there has been some discussion of changing the zoning laws to explain specifically how they're going to affect minority communities and people of color.
Is that directed towards me? Sorry.
Thomas.
Anyway, yeah, look, I think zoning is going to be, I think zoning changes. Look, it's about, we have a dearth of affordable housing in the country, particularly in destination and sort of coastal cities like New York, right? So there's a huge gap between the haves and have-nots. So, zoning has in times gotten in the way of the production of affordable housing. Policy has gotten in the way of production of affordable housing. I think if we want to, the fastest way to provide affordable housing is not even through new construction at all. It's through acquisition and rehab, quite honestly. But to the extent that we're going to create new housing, allowing for zoning changes that will enable the production of housing is going to be transformational. Like, for instance, cities that are very transit oriented, some of the parking requirements even the de Blasio administration did a pretty good job of alleviating some of the parking requirements that makes sometimes the projects not pencil out very well because parking costs are very expensive. Some of the changes they made to, these large senior housing projects that had lots of, parking land available, not only reducing the need for parking for people that don't usually drive, but allowing for the production of housing on those parking lots, I think is also helpful. So I think zoning is critical. Zoning is only one of the tools. It's not the panacea, but certainly helpful.
Professor Delaine, under the Biden plan, when they receive community block grants or transportation grants, which Thomas may be referring to, they have to set aside a certain amount of affordable housing for inclusionary zoning. But the zoning of inclusionary zoning, it still encounters a fair amount of discrimination. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the rules are fairly lax as far as doing. I mean, affordable housing in general in New York, it's pretty tough, but inclusionary housing in particular, you go into these buildings after they're built and developed, and that you find that the makeup of those new buildings and those new communities don't match remotely the makeup of that community before. So then you're asking a question, you're providing more inclusionary housing, more affordable housing, but folks in that community can't get into them. Like something's not working properly.
Well, under Trump, he got rid of the fair housing rules. And what was the feeling? Is that because they were too high? It was too difficult for developers to create plans to eliminate housing discrimination, or now that the Biden administration plans to put them back, is that a good thing from a fairness standpoint, or how does that affect development, Thomas?
Go ahead, Thomas.
Thomas, you have to unmute yourself.
Pardon me, I was going to ask you to repeat the question. I'm seeing questions coming on the chat as well. Yeah.
No, well, and Isaac, you can jump in at any time, and we'll get to you in a minute. But Biden has pledged to reinstate the Obama administration's affirmatively furthering the fair housing rules that Trump had put a stop to. A statement of support, or does that actually affect development in some way, shape, or form?
I think it affects fairness. I think it's a long-term positive solution for affordable housing and for affordable community, for low-income communities, because it's going to help one of the tools that help to ensure that there's fair and accessible, available housing for all. It doesn't, in the short term, positively affect development of affordable housing, because that's basically a restriction on development. So it doesn't in the short term. But I'm supportive of fair housing rules. We, as long as we can account for them early on, we model around it. And I think there are positive long-term solutions for these communities, but it is another restriction on our ability to maximize the leverage of public dollars. It's another restriction, but I think it's a good restriction.
Well, Isaac, you have a genuine passion and appetite for creating solutions required for addressing affordable housing, and your company has been quite successful, L&M, with this Essex Crossing project. For those that are not familiar with it, Mayor Bloomberg had a RFP for a piece of land on the Lower East Side, the Seward Park Urban Reinvestment Area. Can you talk about starting from the RFP to today, which was a journey of several years? How did you kind of put together the dream team that is known as Essex Crossing, and the funding to develop the plan that you have? Isaac. Is Isaac frozen?
I think you might be frozen.
He's frozen in contemplation, though. I thought he was thinking heavily about the question I was asking him. Gerard, talk a little bit about Isaac's development in the scheme. It was developed along the same times as Hudson Yards, right?
Correct.
So,
Correct.
two very different sections of the city, two very different projects
Right.
that are mixed use in the broad sense of the word. So how would you describe it?
So high level till Isaac gets back. There's a large patch of land in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It was vacated over 4 decades ago, has laid vacant for many moons. And there's been a lot of talk and discussion about what to do with this site, which is located in a very central part of Manhattan. There was an RFP that was put out by a prior mayor asking for developers to provide proposals on how to develop the land, as well as providing, new retail, but they had to provide affordable housing. So L&M provided a proposal, as well as with their joint venture team, on developing a mixed-use, multi-purpose development that included retail and commercial space, office space, as well as affordable and market rate housing. So it was a large RFP. L&M ultimately won. There's Isaac, and it was a pretty phenomenal project that is now.
You're praising.
We now have physical buildings that are up and running, and I'll leave this little piece, and then Isaac can take over. As Brian mentioned, about 4 years ago, Isaac gave my students a tour of Essex Crossing, and we were walking around the site, and he was pointing at dirt, like, yeah, we're going to build a building there, and we're going to build a building there. And then by year 1, and by year 2, and by year 3, and now we're able to go and say, here's building number 1, here's building number 2, at different phases of construction. So it's a pretty impressive, development project that provides not only market rate housing, but also affordable housing.
Yeah, Isaac, thanks for coming back to us.
Sorry about that. I've been having the weirdest internet issues. I apologize. Probably my 2 kids are home and the internet's being full throttle. So I apologize.
But that's
that. So
you're not living in your own development, Essex Crossing, are you?
I know
the internet connection is the very best, I'm sure. Tell us about your joint venture.
Initially, Brian, I was beginning before I got looking at this project.
It's a shame. Isaac is such a good public speaker, but
Essex Crossing really project is over. Again? Did I freeze again?
You're not
still freezing a little bit.
How about if I turn off my video? Can you hear me now?
Well, we
try
can
that
clearly now. That'll help. We'll
okay.
Just mention how incredibly handsome you are since we.
Yes, thank you, Brian. So, we were talking a little bit about the partnership, and for those who aren't familiar with the history of the site, between 1967 and 1973, the sites were designated for urban renewal, and basically during that period of time.
Oh no.
Well, as Gerard explained it to you, L&M partnered with BFC Partners, Taconic Investment, and Goldman Sachs. They're pretty much known as the dream team of affordable housing. And they have successfully built $1.5 billion worth of housing there, a mixture of office, retail, entertainment, and market rate housing. Thomas, what I want to ask you is, on your website, it was fascinating to learn that, historically there's been a significant gap in the quality of affordable housing venue versus well-appointed market rate counterparts. In New York City, your efforts have been to provide quality affordable homes with sleek shared spaces. The visuals were amazing. To prove that luxury and affordability are not mutually exclusive. Explain a little bit about your goal to humanize and activate the people that live in these communities and provide them spaces that are a little bit above the par when you think of affordable housing.
Great question. Thank you for that question. A combination of sort of two concepts. First of all, I grew up in the lower income area, and the feeling is that, or the knowledge what you take away from that experience is that these communities are just underthought. It's not, that you can't assume. The assumption is that the same level of rigor and thought is being applied to all communities in all areas in terms of how they're developed, and the reality is that it's just not. So just by just through sheer active thought about how to maximize the use of the built environment to benefit these communities, the goal is to use that and be willing to think about what should be in these communities to help them. That's number one, and that's something that's been with me since I was very young. And number two, just having since early on in my career, learning that we're not just building housing for a fee. There's sort of fiduciary responsibility. There's a moral responsibility to provide a culture and a climate that's suitable for people to live in. Because if you look at stories like the Pruitt-Igoe story, which I'm sure you know about, St. Louis, Missouri, that story where it's one of the most colossal housing failures in the history of our industry. If you create a jungle, if you create a living environment where people feel institutionalized, it's going to become a jungle. And we are responsible for not creating those types of environments. The question is, how do you solve for that?
Yeah, so you talk about the chronic stress or that adverse neighborhoods are under, and the need for relief. And what I find fascinating, especially in the COVID world, these outdoor spaces that you're creating are really the answer that the pandemic is calling out for all development needs or places where people will be, whether they're schools or entertainment venues or, in your case, housing. The terraces that you put into your spaces, the rooftop gardens, and also your incorporation of sustainable efforts within your buildings was very commendable. Talk about some of the development projects that you've put together, the neighborhoods you put them in, and the success that you've had.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't invent the idea of elevated urban spaces and rooftop spaces along those lines. We're not taking credit for that. I think the thing you're uncovering that's on my website is definition of luxury. It doesn't mean what it means is it means relaxation. It means alleviation of stress. And these are very stressful communities. So my goal is to I think they need luxury more than anyone else. And luxury doesn't necessarily mean expensive. It just means frameworks for alleviating stress. And we're just basically identifying that there's a need for luxury in these low income neighborhoods. And you shouldn't feel, we have to maximize the use of public subsidy, right? But it's tough. And because of that, we are incentivized in some senses to create the very environments that we want to stay away from. We're incentivized, the economic incentive structure, we're incentivized to create these institutional looking buildings. And that's not going to be good for anyone in the long term. So what I want to do is help, the industry to think through is that there's nothing wrong with trying to find ways to effectuate affordable luxury, things that we can provide for these people.
You're doing that through unique design elements, though, which
we're being intentional about. Like the building I'm sitting in right now is a construction site. So I mute myself because there's going to be loudness pretty soon.
And where you are, the community and what you're doing.
Yeah. We don't leave any space, any opportunity for elevated outdoor a recreation space. We leave no stone unturned. Every rooftop, every setback, every opportunity, whether it's enjoyed by the entire building or just a couple of apartments, they're all active terraces, because we believe that that's good for not only the people that live in the building, but for the people that are passersby on the street, to understand that there are people that live in their neighborhood who are enjoying where they live. It's important for the entire community. And so we want people sitting on their porches, on their terraces, drinking tea or whatever, and enjoying life, and for people to understand that they're not in an institution, they're at home. And the challenge that we have, because a big part of what we do is rental housing, is how do you create home in the context of rental housing? How do you make people feel like they're at home when they really don't own? Because when they feel that they're at home, they're going to take, first of all, going to take better care of your building, which is business sense for us. But they're going to be deinstitutionalized. They're going to feel that sense of a purpose, a responsibility, of social responsibility. They may pick up after their dogs. They may not trash the streets. It's going to be positive externality that way. So we try to find ways to give people choices so that they can and make them part of the process as much as possible, to make them feel that they have a sense of ownership and that they have some sense of home. So that's the.
You talked about earlier repurposing older structures. You're doing that on the Grand Concourse in the Bronx, right?
No, our rehab project, one of our rehab projects is in Harlem. Actually, in Harlem, we have we're excited about that one. It's a HPD has a program called Affordable Neighborhood Co-op Program, which I'm sure Isaac and Gerard know a lot about. And we're excited about that because it is rehabilitation, but it's also home ownership. Two things that we think are really needed in these communities. But our
in a second, I think we've got a better connection now. Where did you move to your closet, Isaac?
I moved to my closet, yes.
Okay.
I'm not in my bathroom. I feel like I've seen people in the most random places, but I just, for whatever reason, right now it's good. Although it seems like once
you're golden. Don't worry, you're good. So talk about this golden partnership you put together, the dream team of affordable housing. And we were talking about amenities. In your case, I mean, this was not just a little project. This was a huge project with funding coming from several different sources, right? Wells Fargo, the DSA, and also I think Goldman Sachs, if I'm not mistaken. But why do you think the success of your program can't be replicated more often, or do you? Because it is an extremely successful project, and not all public housing projects are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, there's a lot of questions in there. So, I mean, let me talk a little bit about our partnership, right? Which is a partnership of L&M, BFC Partners, Taconic Investment Partners, and really Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group. I think, and a little bit just building on some of the building blocks of community. I think this was a project that obviously had been in people's radar for, really 50 years, since the initial tenements were demolished in the 1970s. And during that time, the East Village and the Lower East Side had gone through a number of changes, but L&M and my company really had started working there in the mid 80s. Ron Molis, the head of L&M's first project in the East Village, was in 1986. So I think we had really, not only were very familiar with this project, but it really had a lot of stake from a development standpoint and an affordable housing point in the East Village and Lower East Side for 25, 30 years. I think as far that sort of, really spoke well to the community. And this was really a community driven project. It really is an example of how, when the public and the private sector work collaboratively together, you can really create something great. And I think that is something that is very replicable. But I think what allowed us to stand out, L&M specifically, was that we had such deep roots in the community as a local developer for so many years. And a size of a project of this size is 1.9 million square feet. Obviously, we felt that there was a lot of capacity that we needed to add to that. So we looked to BFC Partners, who also was similar to L&M, but they have a long history of developing in the East Village, in the Lower East Side, in the community, and developing affordable housing. So we felt like bringing both of those two people together, we could build off each other's skill set, reduce a little bit of the competition. We also acknowledged that there were many pieces of this development, given its size. Specifically, this is a project that not only has over 1,000 units of housing, but also has around 800,000 square feet of commercial space. Either that's ground floor retail, office, cultural facility. I think, Brian, you went through some of these details originally. And while L&M and BSC do have a significant retail portfolio, much of it is smaller retail in the Bronx, right? And in prior to this, even that we didn't have that much experience doing that much office, and we felt as a way to sort of distinguish ourselves and really make sure that we're covering all the pieces with the people. It's sort of like knowing what you do best, right? You know what I mean? I think all development teams feel they can do everything, but really there are groups that specialize even on the development side with Barry. We've helped bringing into iconic investment partners who had really, got their sort of success by developing 111 8th Avenue, which is the former Port Authority building at 14th and 8th Avenue, which they bought and repositioned and turned it into Google's headquarters. They don't have much experience doing affordable housing, but a project like Essex really, had all those different components. So when we were developing our team, we felt really it was super important sort of that we were able to sort of build on our strengths as local affordable housing community builders, obviously very successful ones with a long track record, but also bring in sort of a special sauce of an outsider who could fill in some of these other areas. And also, and for your audience, like who had never applied to an RFP at the time. And again, when you mentioned in the beginning, this was year 12 of the Bloomberg administration. This was really, they had already awarded a lot of RFPs to us or even to Related or some of the other key components. I think by bringing Taconic in there, it proved to us that, we could not only, be a strong asset for the things that we're good at, but we're bringing a new player in here who could add a little bit of extra creativity and pizzazz to the piece. And I think that obviously appealed well to the both the community, but also the people that were responding to the RFP. And the community could take a lot of faith in that L&M had such a long track record of being a great community partner.
Let's talk about the community or the community benefits. There were 192 senior units there. There was a huge demand. The lottery went so quickly for the affordable housing piece. There is the moving of the market, right? A cultural icon within the Lower East Side. The ability to bring in a medical unit. Is it Mount Sinai?
It's NYU Langone.
NYU Langone. I should have known that as an NYU professor. So NYU Langone to the Lower East Side. But what were some of the other community benefits? The developers get a bad rap, right? You're pushing people out. You're not doing enough. It's all about the money. But in this case, you developed a really amazing community.
So I think and the reason why this works in some of the Rebel guys is that the community was with this process the whole entire way, and they actually provided a lot of the building blocks. And I think where we were trusted is because we took the cues and the requirements from the community and went with it. So it starts with 1,000 units of housing, and then the requirement of the community was that 50% of those units be affordable and 50% of the units be market rate. Of those 50% affordable or 500 units of affordable, they said, listen, we want to have a diverse mixture of housing. I think that's interesting because that narrative is really not in the ether today. But they were like, we want AMI, and I don't know how sophisticated people are with some of the affordable housing lingo, but they wanted 200 at 60% of AMI and below, 100 at 110% of AMI and below, 100 at 155% of AMI and below, and then another 100 units of senior housing. So we subsequently added another 92 to get to the 192 that you're talking about. But the community, for us, it was really important that the project really had a range of incomes. I think a lot of the narrative today is, if you're going to come into my community, it needs to be affordable at the lowest level possible, or this level. Like there was such a level of cooperation, compromise, and inclusion that it really is which I think is one of the things that should be replicable, but is challenging to be replicable in future projects because the demand is so large. So that obviously starts with the housing. The second was they really felt it was important from an economic development standpoint to turn the Lower East Side from being sort of a 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. community where people just come to bars and banks at night and really become a more holistic 24/7 community. So for them, they really wanted a plan that emphasized, family entertainment, a world-class supermarket, and even sort of daytime activities like cultural facility or community facility nonprofit office. So subsequently, we've added the largest Trader Joe's in the Eastern Caribbean. We added Target, home goods stores. We brought Regal Cinema in for family entertainment. We built the brand new International Center for Photography museum for cultural facility. And we have 60,000 square feet set aside for nonprofits who can then, mainly from the Lower East Side, who can then find affordable places for their offices. So that was really important part to the community. A third piece was really this focus on micro retail. And Brian, you picked up a little bit of this with the Essex market. And this is also a little bit different by community. Some people really love the big box. And not to say that we don't have some. Obviously, we have a Target, a Trader Joe's, and Regal. But the Lower East Side historically has really been a birthplace for sort of smaller mom and pop entrepreneurs to come, as symbolized by the Essex market. So in addition to sort of repositioning and bringing those 40 plus vendors into a new facility, we actually created another additional 100,000 square foot market of ourselves, where we're really targeting stores and businesses that really have only been that a requirement, I think, for the community is that they couldn't have more than 2 franchises total throughout New York City. So that was a really sort of strong emphasis to focus on micro retail, locally owned, and that was sort of a unique requirement. So in addition to the housing, there was obviously a lot of significant thought into the type of retail and commercial brought into the area to sort of really create a holistic community. Reposition the Essex market, which was sort of a 70-fund public market, keep it in the community, but even better, and then add some additional micro retail. So I think it really was a really well thought out housing plan that focused on making sure that the project was not only financially viable, which the market rate uses make it, but also viable from a holistic and a community standpoint. I think a lot of that thought process not only has made the project successful, but if you get to it, it's also helping us be a little bit more sustainable during this period of time of COVID, because rather than just having all giant Neiman Marcuses like Hudson Yards, we actually have a number of uses that are really thriving in this period, whether that's Trader Joe's or Target, or even to, Thomas was talking about, the early part was about vouchers and subsidies. All those subsidies being in place means that our affordable housing, the 500 units that we have, we basically have 0 vacancies and almost 100% rent collection on those units.
I want to pick up on that if we could. We were talking about Mayor Bloomberg put out the RFP, but under Mayor de Blasio, and we're coming to the end of the mayor's term right now, the city was trying to meet not only the high demand for affordable housing since 2013. I mean, there's 25 million applications have been received for close to 40,000 city units citywide. Mayor Bloomberg rolled out, Mayor de Blasio rolled out a mandatory inclusion housing program, but it's failed to deliver. Gerard, do you want to comment on that? And I'd be interested. We talked a little bit about the Biden plan, but what should the next mayor, whoever that might be, do to address this affordable housing crisis? Gerard.
So, in my opinion, the inclusionary housing was a great idea to have an incentive to encourage more affordable housing in projects that may not have had it. The problem financially is that it's just not a big enough incentive, and that a lot of developers, and I've looked at underwriting for this, is not enough to make it worth the effort. And which is why people weren't really using inclusionary housing prior to the mandatory inclusionary housing, that the incentive wasn't rich enough to take on those units in the building, versus, let's say, 421A, right? That reduction in real estate property taxes is big enough and financially rich enough that developers are incentivized to do it. So they're incentivized to put 20% of their units affordable or 30% of units affordable, because that tax abatement is good enough that it's financeable and it makes the deal pencil out. I think inclusionary housing hasn't really gotten over that hump, which is why you don't see a lot of projects closing utilizing it. And there's been a few developers that have done development of those affordable units off-site, and that's a little controversial.
Yeah. Thomas, do you have an opinion on this one way or the other? I'm not trying to be political. I'm just trying to say, how do we address the issue?
I mean, Isaac might have more to say than I do. I see mandatory inclusionary housing as sort of a continuation or furthering of existing policies. I mean, you've had mandatory inclusionary housing already in 421A tax exemptions, right? I think here they made it geographic and saying these specific areas you must include affordable housing. So I don't know if it was meant to solve the problem of affordable housing. It just furthered policies that were sort of already in existence, I think, and made it not just about, something that's a tag along to some random market rate deal, but it says these certain geographies, you must do it. So I'm not sure it was actually.
Let's talk about those certain geographies. There was a mad rush to the Bronx, right? And Gerard, you have a project you're working on in Harlem. And Isaac, you've been involved in a couple of new projects going forward. Let's pick one on each area and tell me how you've been able to maximize on that. One of you is working on a development along the river in the Bronx. Who's that? Is that the Bronx Point project?
Yeah, so L&M's, we're about to close the Bronx Point project, which
you have a hip hop museum in there, huh?
Exactly, the International Hip Hop Museum. It's hopefully closing in December.
Okay, but tell me how did you do that? It's the Harlem River project in the Bronx. It's a long vacant piece of land, right? And you're going to have over 500 units of affordable housing there. But again, back to the public amenities. In exchange for that, you're building a new park, putting in some retail spaces that didn't exist before, and dedicated a part of the space to a hip hop museum, which should generate some excitement for the neighborhood.
I mean, I think, that is not my project. So Brian, I can't speak on this as well as I can Essex, but it has a similar cross subsidy in a similar way that inclusionary housing is. It's all about getting the incentives right. Like, I think that's the biggest role that the public government has to play, and the most biggest challenging thing is how to incentivize. Gerard picked on incentivize the developer to do that. In Bronx Point and Essex, the incentive was they're going to give the land price at a low enough level, right? That then the developer can make enough money on the other components to make the numbers pencil. So in both of those cases, the acquisition price was significantly reduced from what could be a market rate value. I think at Bronx Point it's probably zero, right? At Essex Crossing was $180 million, right? Now the market rate value of that, $180 million and the Lower East Side was probably closer to $600 million. So the deal was, all right, give us $180 million, but in exchange for that, you're probably going to give back to us roughly $350 million worth of community benefits, right? And similar to Bronx Point, which may have had an elevated value above zero. I don't know exactly what that number is, but in exchange to that, we're going to give you 500 units of affordable housing, and we're going to give you a brand new, beautiful park, and we're going to give you a destination-worthy museum. Now, the international hip hop, it's a different sort of set of economics, but it's just all affordable housing is relatively a bunch of tools that you have in your box that allow you to make sources and uses equally. So whether that's reducing land cost, right, or increasing zoning, the amount of zoning that you can build on a site in exchange for all affordable housing, all tools. And I'd say, to Gerard's point, right now, the affordable housing program, inclusionary program, has been ineffective in creating enough incentive for developers to adequately do it. While at Bronx Point or at Essex Crossing, they got it right. They were like, we're willing to leave this much market rate land acquisition on the table in exchange for you to do this. And what you get as a result, at least at Essex and hopefully Bronx Point too, the incentive was right.
It's very hard work, but you make it look so easy. So that's why I don't understand why we haven't been able to address the issue. And I think, although I'm optimistic, and it sounds like my panelists are optimistic about the Biden administration, it seems to me that the real solution at least needs to be on the ground in those communities itself and with the local leaders, whether it be city government, county government, local administrators, wherever those needs are. Thomas, you also going back to adaptive use, you have some creative design ideas where you partner with churches, right? So there's a plan with Baptist Church, and there's another plan that you have with another church to kind of take those properties and use them in a way that serves the community better. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, church in New York City is the largest landowner in the city, right? So there's a lot of land there, another opportunity. They also tend to be fairly undercapitalized, and they don't tend to have, their needs are not, elaborate. So there's an opportunity there to partner, and their buildings tend to be in disrepair. I mean, the city, the churches has been around longer than the public sector has, right? Church has been here and it's older than the city of New York, the church is, right? So the church is very well respected. So there's a period of time where in the early 80s where when it came down to who's the best custodians of public land, the city at one point gave a lot of land over to the churches, but they're not property managers, they're not developers, and some of that land went into disrepair. Some of those buildings went into disrepair. So we've learned as of late of the last, 30, 40 years, 40, 50, that public-private partnerships are the best sort of structure to, to affect positive change in terms of projects that make sense. So what we do is, as say L&M does as well, is we try to bring sort of mission-driven approach to effectuating these projects. And what we're able to do is unlock the value of that church land and unlock that value for them, unlock that value for the community in which they operate. And sort of it makes sense for all the parties around the table.
Yeah, duly noted and definitely to be commended. You talked about mission-driven values. It's throughout your website. One thing I was very impressed with and was your youth development program and the internships that you offer. I mentioned that Isaac has been so kind to NYU, taking many semesters of students through projects. You have a youth development project where you're nurturing young people into careers in real estate with the summer internships as well. So I find that commendable and the missions associated with it. Let's go to the questions in the chat room because we have about 10 minutes left, and there's quite a few questions. So I'm just going to read them off one at a time, and they're in no particular order and for no particular person. Robin Kramer asks, there's a tension between the goal of providing affordable housing to community members by the embedded preference requirements and the goal of desegregation, given that many New York City communities are fairly segregated. What would be a good solution to this problem? Gerard, do you have any?
I can speak on that. The short answer is there's no easy solution. You're not going to please everybody, right? There's some that are in homeowner communities that don't want more renting apartments in the community, and there's folks in lower income communities that don't want homeownership condos in the community. So it's a delicate dance us as developers on how we improve communities, hopefully, and make them better than they were before. Change is constant. Neighborhoods evolve. Again, there's no perfect answer. I think a good community has balance. So those who are successful in business, and those who are social workers or school teachers, all should have, a quality place to live.
Yeah.
So,
Gerard, I don't know if I gave you enough time to talk about your project in Harlem. It's on a very famous street. 120
yes.
Any sort of development in that area has always been difficult. What exactly are you giving back to the city, and what are you creating there?
So it's a similar story to what Thomas was saying. We bought the site from a faith-based organization, Abyssinian Development Corporation, who received land for free years ago, and they strategically sold pieces of their land to developers who would do a certain type of development. So we historically are affordable housing developers. We went into an RFP and ultimately won out that site. And part of doing the development deal, which was we were going to do affordable and market rate housing. So when we initially got in contract with the seller, we went and met with the city of New York, HPD. We met with HUD, the federal government, and negotiated with both of them on the level of affordability that we would have on site. So we're now in construction now. It's a few blocks away from here. So we're pouring the foundations now. We're really excited about the project, and it's going to be the largest new development project in Central Harlem in decades. Thank you. So we're really excited about it. And part of your question, part of our give back, we're also going to have the first LGBTQ center in Harlem in the building.
Fascinating.
So we're really excited because for that community, they actually don't have a safe space uptown. There's a space in Chelsea, but as far as uptown for Black and brown people, there's not a lot of safe spaces to come and have educational experiences, have social experiences. So that is going to be a part of our project. So we're providing that as well as home ownership and affordability on site.
Robin Kramer also asked, do you think the state needs to take a role in any changes to state laws to facilitate the fair housing development? Isaac, do you have an opinion on that?
I mean, is this related to the first question, or if the state should take a more active role in desegregation, or preferences related to sort of?
You can go either way on that one.
Right. I mean, I think, Bill and Gerard, I do think, neighborhoods do evolve. I mean, first off, the program right now is only a 30% community preference in most cases, right? So I think, there is a level of most projects do have some level of people who have the right to stay in the community and focus on people that have been, ideally each development is the proven thing in New York City is that each development actually does in some way or another contribute to the improvement of the neighborhood, and rents around these projects do rise. So by providing the 30% preference, you do sort of add some stability and ensure that the community that's somewhat impacted by this new development is able to benefit from it, right? So, but I do think it is a 30-70 split. So there is inherently some level of, while I know the studies show that it does contribute to segregation, there is built into a thing to encourage diversity. Two, you see where you could interact is sort of encouraging rezonings or the placement of affordable housing in areas that don't generally have. The Soho rezoning that's coming up is a good example of that, right? Where, that has the potential to really create additional integration within the Soho neighborhood, right? I mean, so I think, even in my project too.
Yeah, we'll be looking at that this semester in our classes, and it's fairly late in the game for the de Blasio administration, but it does raise another question that Robin asked. Should the rules or laws on landmarking be changed to one that says you can prevent new density but allow affordable housing development through increased landmark areas like Soho?
Hey, Brian, before we dive into another question about a specific public benefit, I just want to say and dovetail from what sort of Isaac is saying as well is that, when you study social impact investment in development, social impact investing, one thing that isn't very well discussed or in the political realm of this is that there are trade-offs. You can't do everything at once. You have to understand that you have to come to a consensus of the things that you want to accomplish in a project. And sometimes to get one, you don't get the other. You want to get, so we have to, you won't find, because if you think about the theory of constraints, if you try to accomplish every one of the social goals possible, you won't get a deal done. So
I agree with you, but I also think that developers have a bad rap. I mean, obviously I'm in the business of producing future developers, and I'm trying to teach them through you role models that they can follow and principles and to be optimistic about change, but also that the laws are there to help us make that change if they're enacted in the right ways. So, those are very good points, Thomas. Trade-offs have to happen. Because we teach students here, I wonder what kind of career advice you'd give them. You're all optimistic about the future, at least I hear that through the Biden administration changes and the changes in future developments under the remaining time that we have with de Blasio, and we didn't touch upon who the new mayoralty candidates might be and what could happen there. But what should the NYU students be thinking about, the people that have tuned in here, in terms of if they're looking for jobs in affordable housing? You know, at least with our undergraduates, they sometimes hit that roadblock. Oh, you need that experience before you can come work for us. With our graduate students, it's easier for them to transition because they might already have a background in construction or finance or some area that could be helpful to a developer. But I think that there is a definite need that can be addressed here. What do you think, Thomas? You're muted, Thomas.
Yeah, I'm just clicking on. Stay the course. You know, I think you know, you're going to have sexier opportunities that present themselves, I guess. But if you really want to do development, you really want to do affordable, you know, social impact investment development, I think you have to really stay the course and find the right opportunity, because once you find, you know, a firm that falls in love with you the same way you fall in love with them, it's going to be better for you long term. You won't waste a lot of your, you know, time. And number two, I would say just be willing to do anything to get involved, because some of the shops tend to be smaller and it's very easy to get ownership of something. I mean, you get in the door, they're going to need you after a while, very quickly. So get in the door, be willing to do whatever it takes to get some experience and some responsibility. And after a while, you know, you can't, I think there's, and the thing about affordable housing is it's got sort of an insulated little ecosystem. So it's you have the opportunity to bounce around from developer to lender to syndicator to government to different things to figure out kind of where you want to fit. But I think just find a firm that you like, that likes you, and be willing to do, you know, whatever it takes to.
And Joji, one of our undergraduate students, was commending Thomas on his internship opportunities, which I know are mostly geared towards high school students. Correct, Thomas? Yeah. But and Thomas, be aware that we have scholarships available to young high school students that might be interested in attending SHAC in the real estate program. But Isaac, your internships are few and far between. It's very hard to get there, and you've afforded internships to some of my students in the past, which I want to thank you about. But anyone interested in an internship with L&M or BFC Partners or Taconic, et cetera, what kind of advice do you give them?
Well, I mean, I think certainly L&M, we generally bring around 8 or 9 summer fellows, I believe, a year, and we usually post somewhere in January or February on our webpage. So I think if that's something you're interested in, obviously, you know, look at that. And I think internships are certainly a great avenue, but I think, you know, echoing, you know, what, you know, Thomas said is, you know, perseverance and just getting your foot in the door wherever you are. I mean, if this field, you know, I didn't know when I started this 20 plus years ago that this is exactly what I want to do, but I got involved with an affordable housing developer out in San Francisco, immediately, you know, loved the field. And I think it really does build on a lot of different backgrounds. We have people at L&M who have engineering backgrounds, architecture backgrounds, urban planning backgrounds, MBA business backgrounds, you know what I mean? I think it really is the type of field that if you like it and you get in and you persevere, opportunities are going to come your way. And to Thomas's point, they come very quickly. If you can show that you can walk and chew gum a little bit, and back to your earlier saying, we make it sound so easy. I think what probably the three of us have in common is that we just have an unbelievable perseverance. We just power through. We just like solving problems. We don't get flustered by them. So you don't necessarily have to have be a world-class nuclear physicist to be a real estate developer, but you do have to have the willingness to sort of take problems, juggle them around, and then figure out solutions. So I think for me, it's just be open-minded about solutions, persevere, and get your foot into wherever you can, whatever it means. It doesn't have to be even through an internship. You take a job, you're like, start at a low level, work for the city, just get your foot in somewhere. And I do think it's a type of field that you move up very quickly and can be very rewarding because, there really is, for me personally, nothing more exciting than getting a project completed, seeing people move in and seeing the impact you have on their lives. And all the steps to get there are really great.
And I think the key word there is impact. And I think that people that do have careers where they're impactful are extremely happy. The three of you have the epitome of a genuine passion and appetite for what I consider to be creating solutions to addressing affordable housing needs. And I want to thank you all for joining us today and for your time that you've given us at the Shack Institute. This concludes our program, but thank you very much. I do want to mention that Gerard heads up our internship program at times, provides internships for students himself, and is one of our premier networkers out there. So if any of you students are listening and need networking advice, I know Gerard's always available, as I am. So feel free to reach out to us, and thank you for joining us today.